Well, to answer some of those questions and more, I'm joined live from New York by Niko Pfund. He's president and academic publisher at Oxford University Press, USA. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So looking at Pearson's move shifting into a digital-first strategy, is this a first for a major publisher in this space, and how significant is this?
Well, I think it's important to highlight the fact that Pearson is an educational publisher, and that's different from a research publisher. They're catering primarily to a pedagogical market, and they're clearly the longstanding extant textbook model where you have multiple revisions is simply not working anymore and needs to be updated. And I think this move towards updating content online is very welcome, and it'll be very interesting to watch how it plays out.
So being that it's still early days, though, how likely are other academic publishers to follow suit?
Well, any number of academic publishers, certainly my employer, Oxford University Press, most of our content upon publication is released in multiple formats. It's something we refer to as format agnostic. And as a result, when a book is published, it's published online on a database. It's published in ebook form for consumer use. It's published in print form. It's often published in audio form. So in many ways, I think the publishing industry, I think there's this general notion that the industry is going to tip off this digital cliff, when in fact we've been slowly, and I think quite successfully, rolling down the digital slope for a while now and transitioning quite effectively.
Now, in college, some of the prices for some of the textbooks can be a little bit eye-watering. So with publishers factoring in some of these lower printing costs as they increasingly go digital, what happens to their revenue then?
Well, I think that remains to be seen. I do think that what clearly happened at one point a number of years ago is that there was a market revolt, and the notion that textbook prices could just increase indefinitely because they are effectively a captive market, that just no longer held. And I think that as a result, we're seeing publishers of all sorts experimenting with various different kinds of models. I think one of the key points to make here in terms of that experimentation is the difference between educational work that people actually read and educational work that people reference. So I think college textbooks are read in chunks. Novels, for instance, are read obviously from beginning to end, and a lot of educational and research scholarship is read in a very extractive way. And those distinctions actually require different paths to market and different tools and formats.
So with that being said then, other than the ease to the access of this content, what are some of the ways that digital academic books can really enrich the learning experience?
Well, you can obviously have all sorts of multimedia connections. I think that the static nature of print is quite limiting, and I think all of us have gotten used to being able to move back and forth to different websites, to video, to demonstrations, oftentimes in multiple dimensions of the things that we're supposed to be learning, rather than simply reading about them. We can see them take place before our eyes. And I think that this digital-first approach certainly will enable a much more enriched teaching and learning environment.
Now, we have seen several other industries go to this sort of model years ago. What do you think took academic book publishers so long to sort of latch onto this digital-first strategy?
Well, again, I think that distinction between textbooks and other kinds of publishing is a crucial one, because I think that we've actually seen a lot of presses make this transition already. And a press like Oxford, a significant percentage of our revenue is already coming in via digital sources or through digital formats. So again, I don't think this is quite as radical for the industry overall as it might appear. It is certainly a very significant shift in a business model for one sector of educational publishing.
Now, what about the authors themselves? Because there are some fears that authors may lose out in the same way that musicians have had to, sort of with these music streaming services. What are your thoughts on these fears? Is that the same application?
Well, I think that still needs to be worked out. I think that the notion of this has been with every new technology, this issue has arisen. When with paperbacks decades ago, with ebooks, there was certainly a great deal of discussion about what was an appropriate author share, whether this new technology enabled publisher savings, whether it required increasing expenditures and infrastructural investment by publishers. So I think that this is something that it's sufficiently new that this will all still need to be worked out.
And are you seeing any sort of correlations between the physical versus the digital books when it comes to a student's performance?
That's a great question. There's a regular report done by the Pew Research Center, and it looks at the way in which we retain information as readers and as learners in different formats. And I read that on a regular basis because it's so instructive, and it gets you through this anecdotal thinking about how people read and how people learn. And one of the things that seems to be borne out is that when we read, if we're reading in a in a page format, in other words, if the content is encapsulated in a page. That can be a print page or a digital page. We seem to read more slowly, and we seem to retain that information better. Whereas when we scroll, often on our phones, for instance, our eyes tend to read the first few lines of text, and then they glance down to the lower right hand, and we scroll up. And I think that explains one of the reasons why people often say they print things out in order to retain them and read them. It's not actually a matter of the print, of the format, or rather the object that the format appears on, but it is that notion of this page, this concise page, that seems to slow people down and enable their learning and their retention.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you so much. Niko Pfund there, President and Academic Publisher at Oxford University Press, USA.